The Jewish Channel's Week in Review. Boycotting Israel at American universities, a legal legend retiring, what you can expect at this new restaurant, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. Boycotting Israel is now the official stance of thousands of American studies professors around the country. The American Studies Association has more than 3,800 members, and roughly a third of them participated in the largest ever vote taken by the membership over the question of boycotting Israeli academic institutions. 66% of voters endorsed the boycott. This may well be the greatest legitimacy ever conferred on the so-called Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement, or BDS, which aims to protest Israeli policy in the Palestinian territories. Thousands of professors at hundreds of American universities have spoken and will likely continue to speak and influence others, students and professors alike. At the same time, it's unclear what, if any, practical effect this boycott will have. The full text of the actual action suggested by the resolution is merely 2 sentences. Here are those 2 sentences. It is resolved that the American Studies Association, or ASA, endorses and will honor the call of Palestinian civil society for a boycott of Israeli academic institutions. It is also resolved that the ASA supports the protected rights of students and scholars everywhere to engage in research and public speaking about Israel-Palestine, and in support of the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, or BDS movement. But of course, the larger question of how Israel will be affected by anything that happens here in the U.S. has very little to do with university professors specifically. Rather, Israel's largest concerns with the United States have to do with continued diplomatic, monetary, and military support of the Jewish state, something that exists in large part because of the American consensus on Israel. The reason that this decision by the American Studies Association matters is because it is chipping away at that consensus, and is likely to encourage other professors and students to help chip away at that consensus too. Meantime, one of the major speakers on Israel issues in the academic world, lawyer and professor Alan Dershowitz, has said he'll be retiring from Harvard Law School. He's been a professor there since 1967, when he became the youngest full professor in the school's history. Dershowitz recently stopped by TJC Studios to discuss his memoir, Taking the Stand. You can see that full interview in the Interviews category under TJC Original Series on the Jewish Channel On Demand on cable. And while it's a slow week in the world of Jewish news, the holiday season is a great time to launch a restaurant. Christian Needon reports on one new venue seeking to succeed where others have failed.
A new kosher steakhouse has opened its doors in Manhattan's Midtown East District in the cosmopolitan shadow of the Chrysler Building. La Brochette offers a diverse menu that includes a variety of meats and a full sushi bar, as well as a versatile dining space, one that creatively fits at least 5 different atmospheres into 3 intimate floors. Owner Avi Cohen gave TJC a tour and said location is a key part of his high hopes for La Brochette.
The location, this is Midtown, this is the heart of the city, and my atmosphere here is totally different, homemade atmosphere.
TJC visited La Brochette a day after the restaurant's opening, which drew a few hundred diners to a location that might be familiar to kosher customers as the former home of La Carne Grill. But Cohen has shaped the La Brochette dining experience into something unique, serving high-end food in a 3-tiered space with great views and stylish touches that combine the modern with the classic.
I want to be different from everybody, because usually when you have the regular restaurant, you have everybody on the same floor. My point was to separate people, to have privacies.
Nowhere is more private than the chef's table room, with space for 10 people and located just off the 40-seat main dining floor. Directly above it, though, may be the best view in the house.
The best, lovely place. This is the balcony from the view from the top, like mezzanine. You can see what's going on in the restaurant.
A few steps up from there is the sky room.
This is design I made by myself to make to people feel like you're in the sky. You see the sky.
And a few steps back down takes you to the lounge room, with space for another 40 diners, and an emphasis on youth.
This is lounge for more young people who are gonna feel like home and totally enjoy this place.
To see more from new kosher steakhouse La Brochette, which is currently taking reservations at 340 Lexington Avenue at 39th Street, please tune into the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. Finally, Rabbi James Rudin handled relations with non-Jews at the American Jewish Committee for many years. Some of the lessons from his years are compiled in a book, Christians and Jews, Faith to Faith, now out in paperback. Rudin recently stopped by TJC Studios for an interview, and here are the highlights. And one of the most surprising revelations in the book about your experience. I actually found right in the beginning of the book, which is something that was very surprising to me because it's about how you interacted with evangelical Christians in America. And I've had a lot of interaction with evangelical Christians in America, but I've never asked them the question you asked. And you said that basically you would hand out note cards at interreligious meetings, and you would say, write down the word Israel on the front and write down the definition of that word on the back of the card, and you got very different answers from Jews and Christians.
Yeah, we would do this, did this all the time when I was interreligious director at the American Jewish Committee. Those famous little 3x5 cards we all used in high school and schools, and that we would say I-S-R-A-E-L. Just write those letters down, and on the back, as you said, the definition. And then we would collect the cards, and you could immediately, almost 95% of the time, tell whether a Christian or a Jew wrote it. A Jew would often put down State of Israel, Land of Israel, Jewish people, or the Jewish people. Christians would put down sometimes the State of Israel, but maybe Holy Land, the Church, the New Israel, people of God.
That these were religious doctrinal terms to evangelical Christians that Jews are largely unaware of.
Christians and Jews often use exactly the same words: salvation, Messiah, Israel, and they mean different things to different people. It's exactly the same words. And if you have the old Israel, which would be, from a Christian point of view, you and me, and the new Israel, which would be the Christian church, you can see where the problem is. And we all know, don't we, through advertising, the new is always better than the old.
One of the criticisms I've seen leveled against the Jewish community by Jewish leaders is that the Christians, by and large, in the interreligious dialogues have taken upon themselves some reform and have taken upon themselves some revision of doctrine, perhaps occasionally some revision of text, translating some words differently, and so on and so forth. But there is some criticism that the Jewish community itself has not undergone any change regarding its doctrines, its texts, and what those might say about Christians, about non-Jews more generally.
Every time I would go to a Jewish group of educators, I'd say, what do you teach your kids, high school kids, grade school, middle school kids that you have in the synagogue or in day school? What do you teach them about Christianity? What do you teach them about the so-called intertestamental period? What do you teach them about Jesus of Nazareth? And the answer is usually almost nothing, or sometimes negative. And I'm saying, you know, the New Testament was by and large written about a Jew, Jesus of Nazareth. It was written primarily by Jews, and it was written primarily for Jews. So it's part of our story.
You can see the full interview with Rabbi James Rudin in the interviews category under TJC Original Series on the Jewish Channel On Demand on cable. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Cable Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and on Comcast in the On Demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.